This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is joining us remotely from Portland, Oregon. Well, actually, you're in Eugene, but the brewery is in Portland, Oregon. Sam Pecoraro from Von Ebert Brewing, head brewer for Von Ebert. Welcome to the podcast, Sam.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. How you doing?
For those of you who follow Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and I hope everybody listening to this podcast does, Von Ebert's Alma Heritage Beer was one of our beers of the year last year for Craft Beer and Brewing. Sam also won a GABF bronze medal for their American IPA. That's not a hotly contested category or anything, for Nothing Noble in 2020. I can't wait to talk about everything from saisons to lagers, because you know Von Ebert has also launched a pretty solid lager program, and of course I think we've been working on our lager issue right now, and I want to say that the Bohemian Dark Lager may have scored really well in this upcoming issue, but you'll have to wait. You'll have to wait for that issue to find that one out. We're going to talk about all of those things on this episode of the podcast. First, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with all aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt. Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt is a workhorse of many a brewery and is at home in a variety of beer styles. Crisp sources the lowest nitrogen spring barley from farmers in Fife up to Moray. During malting, high cast moistures and a balance of optimal germination time and temperature result in an even, well-modified malt with a rich color and balanced sweet malt flavor, which is ideally suited to ale brewing. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com for more information on Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt, or call 1-800-374-2739. So, Sam, as we normally start off this podcast, give us a little bit of background on you, how you got to where you are, your brewing career and history, how you got into craft beer in general, and then give us a little bit of the Von Ebert story while you're at it.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. So my entire brewing career has been in Portland, Oregon. Started about 10 years ago. Moved here about a year before that and got a job at a great craft beer bar, the Beer Mongers, which has become an institution in Portland. And through that job, I ended up meeting the owners of Burnside Brewing and started volunteering with them and got up on the brew deck pretty quick, and was there about 3 years. Went and worked with some friends at the Commons Brewery. And after the Commons closed down, got a job with the great people at Breakside Brewing, and then joined Von Ebert about 3 years ago. Originally as the head brewer of the Pearl District location, and then the head brewer of the other location ended up moving on and opening up a brewery in the Valley in Oregon, the Willamette Valley, and then took the position as head brewer of both locations. I joined Von Ebert about a week after they opened up, and from the beginning, we've really wanted to focus on German-inspired lagers, mixed culture beer, and IPA variants. And we've got
right. And so Von Ebert, the Cook family that owned, Von Ebert kind of came out of their previous licensed, arrangement with Fatheads. And then when that agreement didn't happen, when that agreement kind of met its ultimate end, they decided to create this new brand for their brewery, Von Ebert. And that's when you joined the brewery?
Yes, correct. Yep.
I'm mapping it back because we've also talked to Mike Hunsacker, of Grains of Wrath, and he was talking, his story goes back to the Portland Fathead days, and so there's a lot of interconnection and overlap here, and and piecing all the puzzle together.
Yeah, there's interlap and overconnection, all around the country, but especially in the Portland beer scene.
For sure, for sure. So, what initially drew you to craft beer, and what set you on this path to kind of become a brewer?
When I turned 21, I was living in Western North Carolina at the time, going to school at Appalachian State, and there was a really small little kind of mini mart that had a make your own 6-pack program, and I earned a lot of free T-shirts with punch cards and made my way quickly through I think every single one of their beers, and just fell in love with beer through that, and then moved to Ohio for a while and started home brewing. And I think that's a fairly common story that a lot of brewers have, but that's how it happened.
Sure. So you joined up with Von Ebert, as they're making this, shift and launching the Von Ebert brand. Talk to me, about working with, the ownership family and trying to develop, a program for beer. Obviously, when it was Fatheads, there was the recipes and the beers and those brands were there. You strike out to do Von Ebert as a different kind of thing, with a different kind of brand. Clearly there has to be, some kind of hoppy IPA continuity, just because there's an expectation amongst customers there who might have been frequenting the same brew pub, for years and years and years, that, that they have those beers. But at the same time, you want to kind of strike out and create a Von Ebert identity, which, is significant and substantial on its own. Talk to me a little bit about, those early conversations and how you all as a group developed a beer identity for Von Ebert.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you, Jamie. It was not easy at first. I took the job a couple months before I started, and to have to come out with a ton of beers all at once, rather than being able to dial them in slowly over the years, it was difficult. We tried to offer a broad range of not only IPAs, but other kind of like classic American pub ales at first. The Glendoveer brewing location wasn't open yet at the time, so we were producing all of our beer out of the Pearl District. It was a lot to do at one time. But I think, 6 months to a year into it, we were able to, diversify the tap list, get a lot of our German-inspired beers on tap, kind of make a name for a few of our IPAs. I think, a lot of people were really looking for hazy IPAs at the time, but we thought our best beers were a bunch of, clear West Coast IPAs that took about a year to catch on. But once they did, I think we started to dial things in, and I think it was a combination of us pushing customers in a certain direction, but also the customer being willing to try a bunch of different beers on tap.
For you all building, Von Ebert, how did you, kind of view the lager as a piece of this puzzle?
Yeah, I think a couple different ways. One, we really want our Pilsner to be a flagship, side by side with Volatile Substance, our West Coast IPA. But then we also want to have a very strong and diverse seasonal program. We're doing a lot of modern Pilsners, different takes on, Italian Pils and French Pils, which is kind of our tongue-in-cheek, change of raw materials on an Italian Pils. But I think we really want to balance out our IPAs with the flagship Pils, but then we want to gather excitement through our constantly rotating seasonals.
It is kind of a fun thing. And of course, we've all talked to Kevin Davey, a Wayfinder, big lager proponent there in Portland. And there really is this, I love watching these kinds of pockets of lager brewing and competitive lager brewing, folks that are pushing each other to make better lagers, pop up. We had a long stint over the last, couple months of Texas brewers that are all doing the same kind of thing, with lager in Austin, Texas and the surrounds. And it seems like these little cultural beachheads, for lager develop, but, brewers enjoy drinking them. They start making good iterations of them. And those good iterations tend to attract drinkers because they become good beers, and then there's that sharing piece and whatnot. But let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously we talk a lot about lagers here because this is a podcast for brewers and brewers love lagers. But first, the world of craft beer is a different place now. Margins are more important than ever. So why not lower your ingredient cost? Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. Old Orchard produces high volumes of their retail juice brand, so economies of scale keep prices low for their bulk supply program. A little concentrate goes a long way, and you won't lose some of it through filtering like you would with purees. To start increasing your margins now, head over to www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, Brewery DB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million brewery visits were made by craft beer fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In just a few weeks, Brewery DB will unveil an all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB and increase your taproom traffic, set up your account on marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. In a market with so many great lager makers, how did you all set out to create lager that tastes in a way that people expect it, but also isn't just a carbon copy of what other people are making?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways to do that. Number one is just selection of raw materials, selection of yeast strain. I think can differentiate you quite a bit. I think most breweries default to Weyermann Pilsner and Weyermann products for their malt, but going beyond that, process. There's a million different ways to make these beers, and I think they all do create subtleties that make it give a house flavor and a house product.
Let's talk about Von Ebert Pilsner then. When y'all were coming up with that beer, what were some of those key decisions you made that you feel define, what that beer is and the way that it expresses itself?
Yeah, that's a great tie into what I just said about process and raw materials. We wanted to be unique, but not reinvent the wheel. So we did combine a couple of different Pilsner malts. We really wanted to push a more floral, noble hop aroma rather than a lot of the like spice and herbal character that you find in most other products. How do you do,
what are some of those ingredients, selections that you made in order to achieve that, in terms of blending Pilsner malts, for production brewery, that can be an expensive thing. And, if you're not using a singular base malt and you're, pulling sacks and whatnot, then that can be a real pain in the ass from a production standpoint, as well as, ordering smaller quantities and getting those in. What malts do you tend to blend, and what do you find is the benefit of blending different Pilsner malts into a base like that?
Yeah, so to back up a second, at the Pearl District location where we do where we make pills exclusively, we don't have a silo. Everything is by bag. So, it's a little bit extra work, but it's also nice to be able to not have to rely on a particular base malt. We started Pilsner off with a blend of Weyermann Pils, Weyermann Barca Pils, and Best Heidelberg. We got away from the Best Heidelberg. Not that we don't like the malt, but we thought it just brought a little bit more sweetness to the beer than we were looking for.
And so now it's two malts. It's Barca Pilsner and Weyermann Pils.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So 70. Yes, I'm going to say 75% Weyermann Pils, 25% Barca. You asked about the advantage of that. They taste different. There's a unique character coming from blending. And then also you have the advantage of, lots and seasonality and year to year. it's a lot easier to, adjust based on those changes when you have a blended malt rather than relying on one single.
Sure. When it comes to hops, you mentioned wanting to achieve a kind of floral element more so than herbal or spicy. How did that play out with your hops sourcing for this?
Yeah, I think we overcomplicated it a little bit to begin with. We had a blend of we're definitely guilty of that quite a bit, and I think most brewers are. We had we bittered with Magnum, had a little bit of Tet, some Saphir, and Middle Fruit, and just over the years, it really just got dialed back. It's just all Middle Fruit. I think the biggest tweaks we've been making are just changing timing on those, sprinkling them throughout the end of the boil from 20 minutes all the way through partially into the whirlpool has made a big difference. And we're getting as much complexity out of timing as we are, using different varietals.
That's an interesting one, and I love it because I've heard this and I have been hearing this from for brewers. Again, we're working on our lager issue right now, so we've been having a lot of conversations around these. But I love, and even last week, Jeff Wiedeker on the podcast was talking about as they were dialing in their Czech pills that it was this process of simplifying, and that the simpler solution tended to be the better one, that they went into it with craft homebrewers mentality of let's make big flavor, and then found that it got better and better the more that they simplified it. For you all, let's talk a little bit about that timing, if you've been playing with that timing, and in this case I think the hop variety and that timing are kind of inextricable things. You almost have to discuss them together because different hops behave different ways at different times, and they're not all just fungible. You can't just say, all hops are going to work better at, 90 minutes or 60 minutes or 15 minutes in. When it comes to the Middle Fruit that you use, you find that that kind of timing towards the end of the boil gives you the aromatic thing that you're going to, talk to me about some of the tweaking and experimenting that you've done with that timing and how you felt that it impacted the beer.
Yeah, I'll even go a step further. I think, it's not just varietal, but even within the same varietal, different crop years, different alpha, different oils. I mean, they all need to be tweaked, and timing is a great way to do that. Yeah, I think we've really overloaded too much at the end of the boil. So we started breaking up the additions, dragging them further into the whirlpool, and then earlier into the boil. Now we go, we split it up into 3 equal increments. Total, it's around 1.2 pounds per barrel. A third of that gets added at 25 minutes left, a third at 5 minutes, and a third 5 minutes into whirlpool. We just found the hop character is much more complex. We're getting a broader range of, oil aromatics, rather than just kind of one note.
And so before that, what was the timing before you kind of moved into this kind of strategy?
Yeah, incrementally moving to that. I think we started out at maybe one large addition at 10 minutes and then one at the beginning of whirlpool.
Oh, okay. So you were really backloading it when you started rather than, the kind of more consistent through a boil or earlier in the boil and let it all boil out kind of approach.
Yeah, I think that's probably an artifact of also being an IPA brewery. Sometimes habits tend to bleed into your other recipes and processes.
For sure. Then let's talk a little bit about fermentation on and again we'll just use von Ebert Pilsner as kind of the framework to talk about it, and later on I will love to talk to you about some of these variations, especially Italian pills or French style pills or whatnot. But when it comes to fermentation, obviously you mentioned yeast is a key differentiator, and then of course process through that cellaring. Talk to me a little bit about what your fermentation process looks like and some of the choices you've made around that.
Oh man, that's probably the the most complicated, in-depth changes that we've made. I think we've gone through about 8 different strains on Pils at this point, which is pretty funny because they all created drastically different beers in our eyes, but I don't think the consumer necessarily picked all that out. Some of them we tried. More production-friendly strains. Some I thought made the best beer, but were not very production-friendly. Whether that's for harvest or timing or clarity. We just made a change about 3 batches ago and switched to the 3470, the Weihenstephan lager, which is definitely the most production-friendly strain that we use. And why most lager producers around the world tend to default to that. Some of the other ones we used were American lager. Thought that was absolutely fantastic, but not very production friendly. Attenuation was a little bit rough on it. Hard to get it to drop to where 3470 does. Yeah, we really default to knocking out around 52, 53. Pinch at 1.5 million per milliliter Plato. Do a 5-degree temp rise, about 85% of the way through attenuation. Pretty basic, keep it simple.
Yeah. And then end of fermentation, is there any, are you spunding tanks? How do you kind of move past that fermentation and then into the lagering phase?
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting thing about running through 8 different lager strains before we landed where we were was just how they responded to spunding. I mean, some just viability would be very poor afterwards, and some it seemed the additional pressure just had no effect at all. So right now 3470 obviously responds very well to a little pressure at the end. So yeah, we are spunding right now. Yeah, we'll attempt to capture CO2 through spunding, go through a VDK rest. Once VDK is cleaned up, we do crash the tank all at once. I know people do step crashing, but bring it down to 32. Sits there for about 3 weeks. We bring the tank up to higher pressure.
Same tank.
Yep, same tank. We just do drops on the tank. Dump the yeast out the bottom. Yeah. Continue to build pressure and pick up a little additional CO2 before we transfer the beer, and then push it over. The beer is bright and goes to package.
3-week lagering time, is that more of a production concern or, and all single tanks? It's just interesting to me to talk to, because I mean, certainly lager brewers have very different and also very firmly held beliefs around these kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm sure there's several people right now laughing at what we do. It works for us. Part of it is, part of it's the tank design, our cellar. I think everybody's got a little bit different setup, and you have to adjust to what you have. But yeah, sorry. So the 3 weeks is not brew day to package. That's post fermentation lagering. So
that's in the lagering tank.
Yeah. So it's around 5 to 6 week beer.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about some of these other variations on Pilsner. Obviously, Italian Pilsner has become a thing and also inspired the ire from some brewers who still don't believe that it's a real thing. And I love that this year, for example, you all sent us cans of Pierre Lachette, the French-style Pilsner, and and we've seen a few other varieties. Notch is we've got a brewer's perspective from Chris Loring on brewing their Alsatian Pilsner in our upcoming issue. And so we are seeing some more of these quote unquote variations on Pilsner based on other European traditions. I sense that there is as much of a craft beer marketing piece to this for American craft drinkers as there is any real tie to history or tradition in some of these places that are included in these names. But that I don't have a problem with that. I think, what sells beer is useful for this. For you all in thinking about coming, an Italian Pilsner or French Pilsner, where do you, how are you defining those kinds of things, and what kind of frameworks are you setting around them in order to develop beers that fit in that kind of, evolving category?
Yeah, we're not. We're just trying to have fun and give people a general idea of what they're going to have out of the can. I will say French style Pilsner is definitely tongue in cheek. We're not trying to create a new style or anything. It's just a fun play on, a dry hopped Pils. I do want to give a little shout out to Pierre Lachat, our lead brewer at the Glendoveer location. Pierre was his cat, and his cat passed away last week. So, have a Pierre Lachat in his honor.
We'll pour one out. Yeah. When you think about something like French Pils, I mean, you say it's tongue in cheek, but what does a recipe look like for that, and how, what would define it as something like that for you all?
Yeah. So obviously Italian Pils has been around, well over a decade. I think Firestone Walker really brought it to light and started inspiring people to, do new takes on Pilsner. Like a lot of breweries, I think we were inspired by Italian ingredients, or at least, I guess, Adriatic ingredients. So we used the Weyermann Heraclea Pils, kind of played off that and used a few different European noble varietals in that beer. And then with French Pils, really just wanted to switch over raw materials to an all French recipe. So there's it gets a little dry hop of Barbe Rouge, a really kind of cherry forward berry, like more sweet estery hop character. I don't know, maybe we'll end up doing a English Pils or something, although if English IPAs are any indication, that one might not sell that well.
It's an interesting one when, and we see this happening a lot, like brewers will define a beer by the country of origin of its ingredients, and there are lots of different ways to kind of classify and build connections to style. You could do it based on taste, you can do it, purely hedonically in that kind of, way. You could, but more often than not, we do see this, like, this is my German Pils because it's made with German hops and German malt, and it may not exactly taste like, what an expectation is around a German malt, but, or around a German Pilsner, but because it's made that way with those ingredients. And the same kind of thing with their Czech Pils. It was Czech ingredients and it's done this way, then it's this. And that, I think that's just an interesting kind of conceptual, philosophical framework to look at this by. Is a beer that style because of where the ingredients came from? Or is it that beer because it tastes like other beers from that place? I don't think there's one answer to this, but it seems like you all are in that kind of ingredient source camp.
Yeah, maybe sometimes. I think we did that with French Pils, but maybe just because we didn't have a better name for it, or didn't want to take ourselves too seriously on it. I think history kind of dictates that. Like you said, Czech Pils, I think, is a very particular style. It has a very narrow target, right? But then you create something new and it's a very broad target and you can have fun with it.
Let's talk a little bit about dark lager, because that's one in particular that, I've had from you recently that was a standout, Bohemian Dark Lager. As you kind of search for inspiration, around that one, where'd you find it? And talk to me about some of the steps of dialing that beer in.
Yeah, I'll give credit to Kevin at Wayfinder. I think he was Kevin at Wayfinder and Natalie at Braeside Brewing were kind of the two people that really started making that beer around Portland. Making it very well. Jeff Allworth is a huge fan of Czech-style beers in general, specifically dark lagers. And I remember hitting him up and going over to Wayfinder and having that beer and, kind of hearing his feedback on it. And he was really excited. And I think that just made everybody in town want to really take a crack at it. We were definitely not even one of the first 5 people in Portland to make that, I don't want to say little known style, but not a lot of people were making, Czech dark lagers even a few years ago.
The style has exploded, and it was remarkable to us to see how many Czech style dark lagers we received to review for this lager issue. It's in a year-over-year thing. Like the number of Czech dark lagers went from like 2 last year to at least a dozen this year. And it's funny to watch that kind of arc of acceleration as brewers latch on to something that they find compelling.
Yeah, I'm curious. Did you specifically list Czech dark lager as a style within that, or did that just happen organically?
We try not to. We did say dark lagers, but over the last 3 or 4 years, watching the kind of shift from things like Schwarzbier, and Dunkel toward stuff like Czech dark lager. It's been, it's quantifiable in the way that brewers are kind of are making some of those shifts, and that certain styles like Czech dark lager become more interesting and compelling to brewers. Maybe it's just a little bit of we've done this other one before and our customers wanted something new. And so here we are, playing in this new area, which, is totally normal. That's what American craft beer consumers look like. And it kind of fits what brewers like to do, which is make some things and push themselves and solve new problems.
I think that's a testament to, brewers being able to dictate the market sometimes. You're not always able to get people to drink everything, but if, they definitely won't drink it if you don't put it in front of them.
Yeah. And dictate makes it sound so calculated. I think more of it is brewers get excited about making something. And if you get really passionate and excited about something, you tend to make it pretty well. Or if you apply yourself and keep working at it, you get better at it. And when you make something, especially if it's something that's a little different than the thing that people have had before, American craft beer drinkers are in it for that exploration element. It's a different mindset from European beer drinkers who tend to be more focused on, hey, this is my favorite beer and I want to keep drinking it over and over again. American craft beer drinkers love to try new things all the time. And so it's one of those culturally embedded approaches that they have. And so if you can create, bring this thing that they haven't necessarily had before, but that tastes really good right now for some reason or another, then it's a fun way to both make the beer relevant, but also give people a new experience. And, from that brewer's perspective, do something, that challenges you all to try something and to dial something new in like that.
Yeah, it makes the job a lot more fun.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about how, some of the steps of development in that. You mentioned it was one of your brewer's beers, right?
Yeah. So Jason Hansen, our lead brewer at the Glendevere location, where a lot of our seasonal lagers come out of. Yeah, he really wanted to brew one. He's a big fan of dark beers in general, particularly lagers. And I took a crack at it. Used, I don't have the recipe in front of me. Sorry, I can't list off all the ingredients, but really built in a couple of, medium length decoctions, tried to get the beer to finish a little bit more fuller bodied with a little more, a touch of like ester profile, which usually seems very off in lagers, and people do everything to keep that out. But I think it works really well in these styles and differentiates them quite a bit from any type of dark German lager, like you had mentioned, Schwarzbier variants or like Dunkel. Yeah, moderately hopped. I believe we used a Czech lager strain on it, and yeah, lots of notes of like chocolate and dark like kind of cherry cordial. Yeah, really full bodied, and yeah, I think it was a nice crack. We've only brewed it one time, so talking about dialing it in, I think we could probably still do a little bit better on batch two, and it might be a while till that one comes out, but we'll certainly keep chugging away at it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's switch gears and talk about something that's closer to your heart. Or I shouldn't say closer because all of these beers matter to you. But let's talk about IPA, and let's specifically talk about West Coast IPA. Even though West Coast IPA is dead, and we all know that no one buys those. Well, I shouldn't say that because people still buy tons and tons of West Coast IPAs. Nonetheless, let's talk about that because again, you don't just want to meddle with it. Before we do, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards of the industry, with a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing. SS Brewtech has the people and the skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, when it comes to brewing, nobody has your back like Clarion because their food-grade lubricants are formulated to help make your brewing system 100% food safe. That means when you switch to Clarion, you can put the costly potential of contamination and recall out of your mind. All you need to worry about is brewing great beer, and since you already do that, well, it's more like focusing on business as usual. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. So IPA, again, for Von Ebert and for Portland in general, this this broader idea of Pacific Northwest, West Coast IPA is a defining factor that people expect from you, and they expect really good ones, coming out of especially that Pearl Street location, given its past history with great IPAs also. So talk to me about walking into, that kind of expectation and putting your own stamp on, compelling West Coast IPAs.
Yeah, I think like with our entire program, I think it just took a while for people to, get familiar with our brands, get adjusted to, different takes on different styles. Our best selling beer right now is Volatile Substance, just really simple, straightforward West Coast IPA with Mosaic and Simcoe. That beer honestly did not sell very well for about a year. I think that was number 5 or 6 in our sales numbers, and today it's number 1 by far. I think it just takes a while to build a brand and get people to realize, what you're concentrating on. You can tell them, but until they come in and try the beers, that doesn't always go the way you want it to.
It's a funny one, and Portland beer drinkers are stubborn like that. Again, we had the same conversation with Hunsacker, and he was saying, even when he came into Fatheads, then people didn't want to try, they didn't want to try Fatheads beers in Portland. And it took them years for Portlanders to really come around and even say, hey, I want to even drink those beers. That there's a real, kind of, I've got my, the folks that I want to drink them from. And so breaking into that becomes, a crazy challenge. But then again, like if you gain respect for what it is, that people tend to come because, they want to try these things that other people are talking about. How, talk to me about how you went about making beers that were going to change people's minds in that.
Yeah, I think really pushing to have a diverse tap list, have not just a West Coast IPA on tap, but have 3 different ones with completely different descriptions. I think we're beyond the point where people just think, oh, I like West Coast IPA or I like hazy IPA. I mean, people come in and say, do you have a really a dank West Coast IPA? Do you have a really fruit forward West Coast IPA? I feel like having multiples of those on tap and giving people a breakdown even within that style is really the way to, build a crowd and have give people the options, I suppose.
I love that idea, and I think you're right. You can't really talk about West Coast IPA or even hazy IPA as one thing, because within any of those, whether it's hazy or a West Coast IPA, even the expression of something like Nelson Sauvin is going to be incredibly different than something like Mosaic, which is still different than something like Citra, and how you choose to kind of position that becomes can express itself completely differently, within a beer. And in fact, there may be some more similarities between, say, like a Nelson Sauvin hazy IPA and, certain dry West Coast IPAs. They may be more in common than that Nelson Sauvin hazy IPA with other hazy IPAs, in terms of who would like to drink that kind of beer. But talk to me about how you, build these ideas of, say, dank or fruity in West Coast IPAs. I mean, I imagine this is all coming, generally coming down to hops choice, and that there's still some kind of, malt-based consistency through these. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what does that kind of design process look like for some of these like sub-varietals, within a style like West Coast IPA?
Yeah, I think two things are really important. One, just recipe design. It's always we always aim for a top-down approach. We write that concept and that description first, without writing, any raw materials below it. Once that concept is really, dialed in, and we kind of have that picture of what the beer is going to taste like in our brain, then we start working on the raw materials after that. The second part of it is not just plugging in, I want this dank and Southern Hemisphere berry character, not just plugging Nelson into that, but getting to know your particular lot of Nelson, your particular lot of Mosaic, and knowing how those fit within the concepts that you're writing.
How do you do that?
Well, one, having description targets for all your raw materials. So what do we want out of our Mosaic? Do we want berry? Do we want dank? Do we want bubblegum? Do we want, a little bit of pine mixed in? And then understanding, once you get those lots, how close they are to your target. And do we need to make adjustments? Do we need to blend in, some spot purchase lot? Do we need to adjust how we're using them, or what amounts? So having those targets and then doing the trial and error to get even closer to the targets than your raw materials are.
How often do you have to, think about those corrections, and in a day-to-day in the brew house, what does that look like? Because I mean, are you making those decisions every time somebody opens a bag of hops? Are you, checking out the most recent lot and then measuring it against those sensory expectations, and then thinking more broadly about how everything that might use this might need a little bit of shift or the addition of something else to it? Like how frequently, does that play into your decision making?
Well, I mean, rubbing a lot during selection, I think you can, at least set yourself in the right direction and get an idea of how close or far away you're going to be. But you don't really know until you actually get it into the beer and do sensory on the final product. So really just tracking that, being organized about it, making adjustments, and then, tweaking as you go along. You can definitely, take your notes and adjustments from one beer and, be able to incorporate those changes into something else to get you, closer on the first shot.
How do you all do that kind of like sensory evaluation? Certainly if you're a large brewery, like a, New Belgium or whatnot, or Sierra Nevada, like you've got giant trained teams of tasters, and they're tasting every batch, sometimes at multiple, points around there. They're doing it all blind. They have their own lab testing. They've got rooms, and they have little sliding, doors, and, everyone goes through that. Every taster gets profiled for, blindness around certain compounds, so they know who can taste certain things the best, but for a smaller brewery, even a smaller brewery doing production, like that level of granularity is really hard to achieve. but making those decisions in a sensory, kind of way is also super important for you guys on a generally smaller scale than that. What does that look like, and how do you make some of these sensory decisions about, these things after beers are brewed?
Yeah, so we are nowhere near New Belgium, or I mean, you nailed it on the head. We're nowhere near having the capabilities of doing any type of program like that. So I think you have to acknowledge your own shortcomings. Know that we don't have the sample size that we need to really have a statistically relevant sample size.
Sure.
So acknowledging that, for one. Being really diligent about not letting these things slip by for 2 weeks without doing them. Make sure you're at least tasting through everything every day, taking notes. And then the other big thing, relying on other people around town. I mean, I think we have a pretty good support system in Portland where we can reach out to other brewers and say, hey man, we've been tasting through this beer the last few weeks, and just want to get your opinion on it. If you've got any feedback, let us know. I think that's a huge tool. We love doing that, and it's always borne a lot of fruit for us.
When you guys taste, internally, say before you decide to, push something out into, and put it on sale, are you doing this in an organized way, or is it just brewers taking, sitting around and pulling tank samples and, talking about it and seeing what they see? What does that look like specifically?
Yeah, day to day, it's pretty informal. Just be everybody on staff kind of talking through it. I'll try and organize those thoughts and, take action on them. And then once a month, we do sit down for a formal panel. It changes. It goes back and forth between breweries. We'll have a blending session with mixed culture beer. We'll have blind tastings, tasting, product, our product that we bought out in the market, taste from the library, 30, 60, 90 days. It goes back and forth. With only 6 people on staff, it's kind of hard to, wrangle everybody all at once. So it's more about just
Sure.
Plugging away and doing as good of a job as we can throughout the week.
I love that idea, though, that you even go out and buy the product from a retailer and then taste that, just to kind of see how those beers are holding up in the environment that your consumers are tasting it to, which is not just off of a tightly controlled tap wall, in the brewery, served in the best possible way, in the freshest possible way.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, even if we beat our beer up as much as we can purposely, like in a library setting, I guarantee somebody out there is mistreating it even more.
Sure. Let's get back to that IPA subject and talking about how you specifically build some of these kind of subgenres of IPA. What would a fruity West Coast IPA look to like for you, and how would you go about building that variety of West Coast IPA?
Yeah, I'll go back to I think there's a few things. I'll go back to raw materials first. I think there's the same lots may not be the same for everybody. I think we can sort of look to what we selected in the past year. Know that our Azaka is a little bit more fruit forward this year. Our Mosaic's a little bit more fruit forward. The Nelson that we spot purchased isn't quite as intense and OG as it normally is. It kind of has this nice Southern Hemisphere berry character. I'd go through and kind of just make, after writing the concept, just make a list of hops that could fit into that description. And then also there's obviously process variations, bump the temp on fermentation a little bit, get it to finish a little bit more full bodied. Just kind of go through that Rolodex of different techniques and processes and raw materials that fit that concept.
Yeah. Are there some that you find more compelling than others? I'm just if you write it out, which I love that idea of creating, the idea for something, almost a brief, and then working toward the brief, with your recipe development, and thinking about the palette of ingredients that you have to use, towards that. Are there some combinations that you find yourself going back to, or even some of those interesting combinations that may be atypical, but that might deliver fun and interesting results for you?
Yeah. I think I think Nothing Noble is probably a great example of that. That description was really berry, melon, southern hemisphere in a slightly larger, more alcohol prevalent IPA than we normally make, but still within the West Coast family, and a really, really simple grain bill. Nice, like clean, dry. And that ended up being Idaho 7, Nelson, and Mosaic, which was sort of a very odd combination. And I think those three hops together would normally not work very well, but the ones we had just tended to kind of play off one another a little bit better than we expected.
That's really interesting. If for the idea of dank, how do you all capture that dank idea, in a West Coast IPA? And I mean, Portland in general has a reputation for dank, dank West Coast IPA.
Yeah, dank is such a weird word.
Yeah. But how do you capture that, in a West Coast IPA?
Yeah, I mean, some people might disagree with me, but I think dank kind of encaptures a few other things. I mean, it could be, cannabis, petroleum, piney resin, some combination of I guess bull resin, maybe. You can cut that part out if you want to.
It's totally legal in my state, and I know it is in yours too. Yeah. So we're going to roll with that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of products out there that are helping bring that to the forefront. I think cryo, lupulin powder, T90 or T45, that family of like Mosaic, I think really brings that forward. And then malt bill, trying to get things that not interfere with that. Cutting out a lot of crystal malt. I think people or brewers in general across the country have really dialed back on that, but I think it brings forward those characters in a lot more pungent way.
So you're saying that the caramel malt brings forward the dank character?
No, the opposite.
Or you're saying that
the opposite.
Opposite. So cutting it out actually helps bring some of that dank forward by cutting some of that sweetness. That makes sense. And yet, now we're also seeing brewers, find a nostalgic place for caramel malts again too. It's funny how cyclical all of these things, ultimately become. When it comes to your West Coast IPAs, are there any other subgenres that you find consumers asking for, or pieces that you need to fill in? You mentioned fruity and dank. Are there other? I'm curious just how much more specific that gets.
Yeah, for better or worse, I think ABV plays a huge role in that. And just even within, very particular like American IPA or West Coast IPA, I feel like, there's a subset that really wants, I'm looking for like a low 6%, easy drinking, American IPA versus I don't drink anything below 7%. And then I think that's also broken down within pale ales and with imperial IPAs, and that's a big one we see. So we try and have a board that has a broad range, of ABVs.
Where do those lines line up? That drinker, who wants the lower ABV beer, where does that tend to be versus that, the guy that might only drink double IPAs, and it may not be a guy, maybe a woman as well. That consumer that only drinks, 8% plus, punch you in the face hoppy beers.
You mean where is that line of alcohol?
Are there some sweet spots for these? Like how
Oh yeah,
is that pale ale drinker that really wants a 5% hoppy beer? How many of those folks are there compared to that person whose line goes up to 6.5? Versus that consumer that wants something 7.5, 8 plus. I'm curious where the typical demand lands for those.
yeah. I think that I mean, this is from my perspective. I haven't done a poll on this or asked anybody, but yeah, I think that like high 6% range is sort of where most people fall. I think that there's something scary about something that goes over 7%, but I feel like it's pretty easy to create a high quality high 6% American IPA without having to reinvent the wheel.
It's been fascinating to watch it over the past year or two because the last year of COVID restrictions have completely thrown all of these assumptions out the window since draft beer, basically disappeared and people started buying, packaged beer. And of course, we saw imperial strength beers just shoot up in popularity because people were shopping less and wanting to get more quote unquote bang for their buck. So everything got weird. And I think we'll watch this year as people get out more and get back into drinking establishments. We'll watch things, become normal again. From your perspective though, even those ABV levels impact the way that hops express and the way that, you kind of construct these flavors. Talk to me a little bit about the difference between, building, say, like 5.5 to 6.5% IPA versus building a 7.5 to 8.5%, double IPA.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things with lower alcohol IPAs and higher alcohol pale ales. It's a lot easier to pick up more like green and vegetal character with overhopping it. So obviously dialing back hops and adjusting the amount of hop product, the ratio of hop products that you're using. So, with a lower alcohol beer, we tend to increase the amount of, cryo and extracts that we're using to sort of dial back that vegetal matter. With, anything over 7%, I feel like it can handle quite a bit more. Just take everything to the next level and, doing a, 5 pound a barrel dry hop on a 7.5% IPA is a lot more forgiving than, pushing that much hop matter at a 5.5% beer.
Sure. There's enough body and sweetness and bitterness and all the other characters that'll help cover up some of that, the vegetal character that will get into it just because of that kind of volume.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, solubility and, in ethanol versus in water, it extracts a lot of different character.
Oh, you're saying so that, that additional alcohol will pull more of the kind of more flavorful elements out of the hops themselves just because it's higher ABV?
Yep.
Cool. How does, this West Coast IPA program kind of jive with, your hazy approach also? It's hard to not make a hazy IPA these days. And generally, even in Portland, there's as they are still, there's a significant demand for this kind of, hazy IPA approach. We're watching hazy IPA kind of move in a whole lot of different directions, between different brewers and different locations and whatnot. Everything from the kind of West Coast hazy IPAs, which are a little more dry and a little more bitter, from folks like Cellar Maker, to, fully super hyper sweet, and please the fan kind of approaches in some of the spots in the Northeast. For you all and that kind of local Portland market, what do people want from hazy IPA from you, and how do you think about that? How those hazy IPAs fit into your overall program?
Yeah, I mean, we take them, just as seriously as any of our other IPAs. I will admit I kind of passed the hazy IPA program off to our lead brewer at the Pearl District location, Eric Ebel. He used to be brewmaster at Laurelwood Brewing, and so really talented, making a lot of great hazy IPAs. He's done a great job, really streamlined it. I think we overcomplicated everything at first, and we're offering way too many options, kind of chasing our tails, jumping around on yeast strain, trying to add fruit to a bunch of them. And I think the big improvement came when he just kind of dialed everything back and said, listen, let's just make a couple of these. Let's focus on them. Let's, select certain hops just for these beers, dial in the concept and, have all the raw materials ready to go for them.
So where did you end up when you simplified? What do those core hazy IPAs then look like for Von Ebert?
Yeah, really, we just have two now. We have a couple of other kind of rotating beers or seasonals, but Sector 7 was our first hazy IPA. I wrote the original recipe for that. Eric has taken it in a much better direction. That's a 7% Citra heavy, a little bit of Idaho 7, hot and cold side, and we just started sprinkling some Sultana in there, which I think was a really nice addition. Give it a little bit more diversified fruit character, a little bit of that like pineapple to kind of complement the yeast esters. And then the other one is a 6-ish% hazy pale ale called Haze Hop. Also a lot of Citra and touch of Azaka.
How do you think about, bitterness in these beers? It's you're in an area where people have a certain tolerance for bitterness and, enjoy that as a component, maybe more so than they do in some other areas of the country. Does that impact the way that you sculpt the bitterness or the level, of intensity of that bitterness in your hazy IPAs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more than bitterness for us, really the thing we had to dial in was just finishing gravity, TG. We were admittedly kind of heading too far in either direction and really like kind of looking at where other people's beers were finishing. And we were like, finishing at 6 Plato sounds like a great idea. And these beers are great. And then, other people finishing at 3.5, and, those beers tasted great. Really getting those dialed in was step number one, and then finding the bitterness that worked with them. We're really targeting balanced beer. We have pubs and tap rooms, and trying to have most of our beer, sold over our own counters. We want people to be able to come in and have, have a few pints instead of, having a big sweet underbittered beer that, they only want 10 ounces of. But that's okay too.
Where did you end up at that kind of finishing gravity and rough IBU kind of territory?
Yeah, so we don't do just all Whirlpool editions. We do have a small bitter in charge at the beginning of each of these beers. We found that around 4 Plato, 4.5 Plato, 5 Plato is kind of the highest for some of the bigger 7 or 8% beers. And then targeting somewhere between 45 and 60 BUs seems to work well for us. 60
BUs. Okay. You're not afraid to go there.
Well, I will say that's also, our brew sheets. That's not tested. So
it's calculated, not tested. Sure.
Calculated.
In the bigger picture, what does the near future look like for Von Ebert, in terms of what, plans for this coming year? And then, what's the big long-term picture goal for Von Ebert overall?
Continue to, dial in what we have. And we just opened up a couple new tap rooms in Portland. So now we have 4 locations. We'd love to continue to offer a great experience. Barrelage is increasing. We have a couple new hires that are coming on. The last couple of years done about 2,000 barrels a year, and we'd love to bump that up by about 50% and start getting beer to, Idaho and Seattle, spread the market in Oregon, and get more beers to each corner of the state. yeah, keep doing what we're doing.
Well, it's great in this kind of environment that you all are continuing to grow and expand, and that's a really cool thing. But it's happening on the back of great beer and beer that people want to drink, and so that's a cool thing. Sam, yeah, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Crisp Scottish pale ale malt is at home in a variety of beer styles. Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solutions. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com today. Let SS Brewtech outfit your brewhouse and gain peace of mind with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and if you're a pro brewer, consider our new all-access pro subscriptions that combine the magazines along with exclusive online content and more. Sam, if people want to learn more about Von Ebert and the beers that you brew, where do they find you?
Yeah, VonEbertBrewing.com. We always have an updated tap list on there. Yeah, lots of info about each of our locations and hours, and look for some updates to the website coming soon.
Fantastic. And if you want to read more, of course, you can read we've written about Alma, their heritage beer, in our last 2020 Best in Beer issue. And I know that there's a review of the Bohemian Dark Lager coming up in the lager issue that we're working on now. Sam Pecoraro, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jamie. That was fun.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.